everyone, and welcome back to People Do Wanna Know podcast. Today, I'm introducing you to a very special lady, an absolutely incredible author and journalist, Rachelle Unreich. Rachelle has been a journalist for nearly 40 years, including 7 years in the United States, where she wrote about the entertainment industry. Her work has appeared in Harper's Bazaar, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Australian Financial Review, Elle, Rolling Stone, Good Weekend, and she has been extensively published in the US, the UK, and Southeast Asia. She lives in Melbourne, Australia. Rachelle and I connected on social media when she told me about her book, A Brilliant Life. A Brilliant Life tells the story of Rachelle's mother, Mira, who was a Holocaust survivor. And listen, I'll be completely honest, my first thought was, another Holocaust book. I don't know about you, but when I think about Holocaust books, it makes me sad. The stories often weigh me down, and having lived through October 7th, I didn't know how much I wanted to read a Holocaust book at this time. All of us have also heard so many different Holocaust stories and accounts, and something about the whole thing made me reluctant. But spoiler alert, I was completely wrong, and Rachelle's book is now one of my all-time favorite Holocaust books. All the words I just used to describe what I typically think of a Holocaust book to be, A Brilliant Life is the opposite of that. Rachelle found a way to write this book with optimism and what she calls buoyancy. Although it talked about incredibly difficult things, I was completely immersed, and I felt optimistic throughout reading it. I read the book very quickly and have raved about it to all of my friends. It's definitely not just a quote-unquote another Holocaust book. It's so much more. In this episode, Rachelle and I discuss the book, of course, but also talk about her mother Mira's legacy and how Rachelle feels as a Jewish person and author post-October 7th. Rachelle was also a contributor author to On Being Jewish Now, which I had discussed with Zibby Owens and Bradley Tusk just a month or two ago, so she'll give us a sneak peek of her essay there. I also loved learning a little bit about Jewish life in Australia through Rachelle. One of my goals in life is to go to Australia at one point and meet the community there. Apparently, there are only 100,000 Jews in all of Australia, but I have heard the community is very strong there, so I guess it's small but mighty. And if you ask me what my dream project in life would be, it would be to create a travel show where I go around all the various Jewish communities worldwide and interview them. So I guess this is me externalizing this thought and manifesting it into existence, hopefully at some point. Anyway, the time flew by talking to Rachelle. She's made for podcasts, honestly. The way she structures her thoughts and how she's able to weave wisdom throughout what she's saying, it's really an incredible and unique gift that she has. I think you will love this episode, and please do take the time to read A Brilliant Life. Please enjoy. Hello, Rachelle. Welcome to People Do Wanna Know podcast. How are you?
Hi, Margarita. I'm happy to be here from Melbourne, Australia.
I can't believe we're in different days right now. Like, that to me is crazy.
I know. We're ahead of the game, maybe only in this way in Australia, but at least today.
I actually think you might be the second guest I've ever had that was on a different day when we recorded, because I recorded with somebody from Japan one time. It's always an interesting experience, and I appreciate you doing this. My first question for you is, tell us about yourself. What do you do, and how did you get there?
Sure. I'm traditionally a journalist. I've been working as a journalist for nearly 40 years and mostly writing about the entertainment industry and fashion. I spent a long time in both New York and Los Angeles, a combined 7 years, writing mainly about the entertainment industry. So that my party trick is that if you name 5 people that you've loved, 5 actors from the 1990s, I always think I've interviewed at least 4 of them. So that was my background, and I lived in Sydney as well. Although when I studied at university, I did an arts and law degree, which I never practiced. I had to finish it, or my Jewish parents would have killed me. And I always thought I would be a journalist, even though bubbling in the back of my mind was this idea that I wanted to write my mother's story. She was a Holocaust survivor, my mother Mira, and I knew that she had a really important historical story, but I guess as time wore on, I felt the gravitas of that. I felt an inability to really get it down on paper in the way I wanted. And I just got more intimidated by that project. So I kept putting it off and putting it off. She passed away in 2017, and I thought, I think I'll write this one day. And still it didn't happen until COVID hit. And then, of course, we all had a lot more time to do things. I didn't do it straight away even then. I waited until we were in lockdown number 6 in Melbourne. We were, I think, the most locked down city in the world. And finally, I think that combination of motivation but also fear that I would never write this book came all to the boil. And I finally sat down and wrote this thing in 6 weeks without leaving my computer was the first draft. And so it's been really interesting to go from being a journalist and doing that full time for 4 decades and now being on this book trail, which is even more strange given that my book came out just a few weeks after October the 7th, because what that has meant for me is the occasional protester at an event I'm doing or answering questions that I just didn't anticipate before when I was writing this.
What a shame that a book about the Holocaust could be somehow protested or looked at negatively by anybody. It's crazy. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about, it's one of those things that the better you get, the more pressure you feel to deliver. So writing a book about your mom's story, especially as you go through your career and you become a better writer and you have more accomplishments under your belt, the pressure grows. And how do you put into words the most important, the most pivotal thing for somebody? So I commend you because the book you wrote is beautifully written. I read it in 2 days and I work full time and run a podcast. Like, I didn't have time to sit there and read a book, but I couldn't put it down. I thought it was fantastic.
I do hear that from readers. The most common thing I hear is that they pick it up, they read it in 1 or 2 sittings, then it leaves them with something. And so even though you said, what a shame that my book came out just after October the 7th, in a way I think the timing is glorious because my mother really stood for finding humanity and hope and connection in the darkest of times during the Holocaust. My mother, Mira, was 17 when she was in 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and on a death march. And yet, famously in our family, when she was interviewed years and years later, decades later, by the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, and they asked her if she learned anything in the Holocaust, even though she had lost so many members of her family and seen, in fact, her father brutally murdered, she said, in the Holocaust, I learned about the goodness of people. And so I guess what has held me aloft in this time is that whenever I feel I just can't talk about this or life feels really dark and hard and people feel really difficult, I go back to her words because one of the reasons I wrote this book was to offer a template for how to live because she managed to live so joyously and buoyantly despite everything. I felt like she really showed that you can overcome terrible trauma and still live this life of happiness and purpose and joy. I think it's really helped a lot of people who have come to it hoping that it's not a harrowing Holocaust story, and I don't think it is, even though there are really difficult bits. And what they find, and sometimes to their surprise, is that it's really uplifting and it is actually the perfect balm for a terrible time, and it doesn't have to be this October the 7th level terrible. I've heard from people who are going through cancer treatments, who've experienced family estrangement, who have lost an elderly parent or a young parent and are experiencing grief. All those people have found something, like maybe in my book, but more than that, in my mother's words and her way to life, her way of living.
That's really beautifully said. And reading the book even, I felt, despite it all, weirdly, I felt optimism. It almost felt like I was rooting for Mira to make it out at any stage. There's a part in your book where Mira almost dies. She was ready to go. She was like laying there ready to die because she was starved for so long. And she had the dream where your grandmother visited her and comforted her. And the next day she found the strength to continue. It's amazing that even in the darkest moments, she was able to maintain this optimism. And I think what's true for Mira and for many Holocaust survivors was that was the thing that kept them alive, is this unwillingness to give up and this need to find positivity. Something I was curious about is you're in a unique position where I think you have gotten to know your mom in a very vulnerable, intimate way that many children never get to know their parents. And it's difficult to ask your mom some of these questions, to know, for example, the details about your mom's relationship with your father or her ex-partners, and you asked really personal things. What do you think it has taught you about the relationship between parents and children? You have your own kids and you're raising them with this beautiful legacy of your mom's story.
Yeah, so the background to that is that I never expected to be sitting down and interviewing my mother. I really thought that I had all the material I needed to ever write a book because she had done so many testimonies. And unlike a lot of Holocaust survivors, she was willing to speak about her experiences and had incredible recall and had really gone through some very historical moments of the Holocaust. So I thought, well, my book will be about that one day. And it was only when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and in the last 6 months of her life, when she was already 89 years old, she started to lose a lot of the light that I'd associated with her. Like, I was used to her being such an upbeat person, so independent, always ready to go. Every morning I'd call her and she'd greet me the same way, and she'd say something like, "Hello, my darling daughter Rachi. How wonderful it is to hear from you today." As if I didn't call her every day. She acted each time as if it was fresh and new, and that summarizes how she was in life. Always willing to experience things, just this whirring dervish of a person. And she lost a lot of that in the last 6 months as her body became more depleted of energy, as chemo took hold, as pain became more of a factor. Her voice changed, her pallor changed, her demeanor changed, and she couldn't do much. And so my brother, who is an ex-publisher, but has also followed me as a journalist and encouraged me, just said to me, "Why don't you interview Mum just to distract her, to give her something to do?" I wasn't thinking I wanted to gather material. I was just thinking that I would do just that, give her something a bit different in her day. And so when I started, it wasn't with anything formal or an aim. I started with the simplest of questions. Did you have any pets growing up? What did you eat for breakfast? Just the most trivial and frivolous things. And of course, as a journalist, I'm so used to interviewing people. So for me, it's quite natural to have this conversation that leads somewhere. But very soon, we started talking about more complex things and more nuanced things. And I realized actually there was so much about her I didn't know. We often look at our parents as our parents and we see them in that role. But we don't, and we might find out their biography. Where were you born? When did you meet your spouse? Where did you go to school? What did you do for a living? But we don't really ask them, who are you? What makes you tick? What things are you proudest of? What motto did your parents pass down to you that you wanted to hold dear? What were you scared of? I mean, all those things that I started asking her created this intimacy between us that I had really never experienced before, as close as we were. And, in my book, I describe it as if we had this last mother-daughter holiday where we got to laugh and love and cry and just hold each other fiercely. It was really an incredible gift to have that in her last few months. And there were so many answers that were surprising, so many things. One was, you mentioned before, I asked her about my father, and the lens with which children see a relationship is so different to how the person in it sees that relationship. Much to my surprise and delight, I did not know that my parents had this passionate love affair, and apparently they did. I really think it's almost essential for people to do this, to fill in their own jigsaw puzzle pieces of their lives if they can, if they're lucky enough to still have parents living. But I also really just got to know her anew, so that by the time I wrote this book, I really knew not only how she thought about life, but I can hear her now. I can hear her through everything I go through in life now. I know what she would say to me, not just because I knew her my whole life, but because I knew her in this 6-month period of interviewing her. It really made such a difference. Now I really implore people to try and do it. And if their parents aren't living, to try and interview people around their parents, their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, anyone who can shed light on that. Because It's amazing how much information is out there that you might not have access to. Some people actually only hear those stories when they're sitting shiva for a parent, and neighbours or friends will come round and start telling them stories, and they'll think, I never knew that. I think the themes that kept coming up for us over and over was her ability to look forward to the future, to always look ahead and not look backwards. And that's something I've really learned from her and taken from her that I want to pass down to my two children. This essence of faith, because to me, she was all about faith. And I don't just mean faith in God, although she did have a strong faith in God, but she also had a great faith that tomorrow could be brighter than today. It always held that possibility, that people were essentially good, that the universe has magical gifts to offer. I don't think she would have expressed it that way, but those were the things I kept learning from her again and again and again. I do think she had a certain kind of magic around her that I want my children to see as well. Part of it is that I think we have to be trained to notice these things. I think magic and mystery and strange things we don't understand happen around us all, but we aren't all attuned to noticing them. And she was somebody who was, I guess, in common vernacular, she was present in life. She really looked around her and she really kept track of everything going on. And she held it with her, the positive things, when she walked through daily life in the smallest of ways and then in the biggest of ways too.
That's actually a great segue into something I'm very curious about, because I haven't seen this theme come across in other accounts of the Holocaust or stories from the Holocaust. A recurring motif or theme in the book is the concept of what happens after we die, whether it's ghosts or afterlife. Do you believe in ghosts and the supernatural?
Yes, although I don't know if Jewish law actually calls it the supernatural, but I do believe in that the soul keeps going on, and that I often feel my mother around me. I felt this while she was living still, because she had so many stories about being connected to her own mother, even though her mother was killed when she was just 17 in Plaszow concentration camp. But she always felt her mother around her and derived power from that. And then growing up in my own life, there were always so many strange things that happened that you try to explain them and you can give them names like, well, that was coincidence, or this happened because of this and this. To me, there is something bigger afoot. And I don't want to press my views on people who don't believe in the same things as me. All I can do, which is what I've tried to do in the book, is tell people my experiences. They can draw whatever conclusion they want from that. But for me, it's unquestionable that I do believe in that. But I feel in my most troubled times that my mother is still hovering around somewhere, that she comes to me in some way when I need her. I'm reminded of that in those times, not just with my mother, but I've lost other people in my life whose presence I have felt probably more strongly just after they died. You know, when I was writing this book, the strangest things kept happening to me. These, again, I'll just call them coincidences for the purposes of this. But every time I was writing about something, there would be a mimicry of it in real life. So just for example, I was writing one day a section where my mother was in the last camp, Neustadt Glavy, where there happened to be a very vicious Nazi officer who, for sport, when everyone was standing at the Appelplatz, the daily roll call, he would get his German Shepherd dog and make it turn on various prisoners and always pick them out randomly, so that everyone became terrified of this dog and this officer. And that day, I've got a closed-off house with a high fence, so there's no coming into my yard. And I walk to my backyard and I open the door, and suddenly, I have no pets, a dog springs at me from the backyard, and I'm just protected by my fly-wire door. And I get this massive shock. And it turned out that my gardener was there that day, and he brought, for the very first time ever, his rescue dog with him, his son's rescue dog, actually. And just for that moment, it had been off a leash and had gotten a fright, and so had started barking and racing at me. Just for that to happen on the day that I was writing that particular segment was strange, but that was reiterated at least 4 times in different ways throughout the writing of this book. Even the way this was written, I've been a journalist for a long time, but I'm a procrastinator too. I'm someone that writes a little bit, gets up and has a coffee, walks around the block, comes back to my desk. I find quite a few other things to do in my day in between the writing. And for writing A Brilliant Life, I just sat down and it was as if I was transfixed. I sat at my computer at 8 or 9 every morning. I didn't leave till midnight. I still don't know how my kids got fed in that time, but they did. And I wrote with a fury and a passion and with a free-flowing ability that has just not ever happened to me before in the 37 years before or since. And I really do think that my mother guided me in writing this book. And over the next year, I kept discovering these things which were amazing for my research. So one of the things that was really important to me was to get all the facts right in this. There are Holocaust books that are problematic when they're incorrect, and any book is problematic if it has an error in it, and specifically that applies to the Holocaust because I didn't want anyone to deny what happened to my mother because of some factual error. So I took absolute pains to make sure that everything that could be verified was verified. But what was incredible was that all these bits of research would come to me when I needed them. So we've still kept my mother's house pretty intact, but I'd be going there rifling through things and finding just the document I needed about, let's say, her home life. Or I found at the beginning I start with an escapee's testimony. He escaped from Treblinka and he becomes very important in my mother's family. Nobody knew that he had actually given a testimony. And it was only until after I'd written quite a few drafts that I ended up finding a mislabeled document in Yad Vashem in Israel that then led to some archival documents in Maryland in America. And it turned out, much to his family's surprise, that he had actually given this 14-page testimony during the war. So all these things I was looking for them, but they did come to me at just the right time.
That was one of the most surprising things for me in your book that I learned about, was that you had talked about a couple of instances where before it was officially the Holocaust, there were these people that were taken to camps and prisoners, and they escaped and they came back to warn Jewish cities that this was happening. And all the Jews were like, no, that can't be. This is the German society. What are you talking about? And I was just so surprised about the denialism that was happening in the Jewish society back then. That was something I learned from your book.
Yeah, look, I remember that Elie Wiesel's book Night starts out in a very similar way with Moshe the Beadle trying to warn people about what has been happening, and no one believes him. Of course, we had the same thing happen around my family, and it was my grandfather Dolphy who heard about this escapee, and my uncle knew about this escapee, and he said, I want to meet with him. And so he traveled by bus and passed several towns to go and meet with him and hear his story firsthand. And from then on, he knew that it was dangerous times indeed. But this escapee, David, at the beginning of my book, did give a report before the Verbar Wetzler report, and yet it did seem to go to Jewish communities. The working group got hold of his testimony, which was this underground partisan group, but it didn't seem to make it to the places that needed to hear it.
Hearing all of this, I'll mention that I totally believe in all of the supernatural stuff. And I actually did some research on this amongst rabbis and Orthodox Jewish friends that I have, because I got nosy. I was like, what do the Jews think about ghosts and stuff? And so I came to my friend Steph. She is my Orthodox Jewish friend. Anytime I have any kind of question, I ask her. If she can't answer for me, I go to a rabbi that I'm very close with. And I was like, do Jews believe in talking to the dead and the dead being able to contact us after death? And she was like, oh, absolutely. Absolutely they do. And I was like, how do you know? Why are you so confident? And she was like, Margarita, in Judaism, it's strictly forbidden to try to contact the dead through like a medium or a psychic. Like it's really looked down upon. If they knew it was fake, why would they forbid it? And I was like, oh, good point. Good point. I thought that was interesting. And I'll tell you, I had an experience 2 years ago with a Balinesian healer. So I don't tend to seek out these things. But when I was in Bali by myself for 3 weeks, I met an American girl who was this like voodoo juju yoga instructor. She just graduated college and she was traveling Asia by herself. And she knew that I had a couple of days on the trip left. And she was like, you need to go to a healer. And I was like, I don't really do those things. Like they're frowned upon in Judaism. And she's like, Margarita, you're in Bali. Like this is the place to do it. It's $20. Like go do it. And I'm like, aren't they all a sham? And she's like, the good ones, the real ones are the ones that don't advertise themselves. You have to know someone who can connect you. I got connected to this guy. Let me give you his WhatsApp. You can only reach him on WhatsApp. You can ask for a session. And so I went there. The interesting thing is the healer doubles as a cooking school facility. His wife runs like an Indonesian cooking class school. And then next door is this little shrine where he sits. And so when I got there, I had to put on like a special garment because I was wearing pants and you have to have your legs covered in a skirt. And it all smelled like incense. Like it was dark and scary in there. I think for the dramatic effect delivered. Like if it's a gimmick, they still delivered because I was like, I feel a little eerie. And so here's my 2 cents on that experience. I think he has abilities, but he's stingy with how much he says because he wants you to come back. Some of the things he said really freaked me out because I don't know how he guessed it or intuited it. And a lot of the other stuff he said was straight bullshit. Let me give you an example of what was bullshit. So I asked him to talk to me about dating and relationships as I'm a single 27-year-old woman and I'm looking to find my husband. So I was curious what he had to say. And he told me that whenever he didn't know exactly what it would be, he would speak in the knots. So like, he will not be blonde. He will not be from Africa that way. And so he had said that he will not be from Russia, Ukraine, like all the former Soviet Union countries, which is like bummer because I'm an Eastern European Ukrainian Jew, but he didn't exclude, for example, Israel or America. So I knew it could be like an American Jew or an Israeli Jew. He also said the person would be oval face, brown hair with light scruff, like a beard almost. I have now dated at least 8 men who fit that criteria and it has not worked out. I don't know what that Balinesian healer was on, but it was clearly BS. But what he did say that really freaked me out, that made me believe that he had abilities, was at the end, he said, do you know your mother's mom? So my maternal grandmother is the only death I have really profoundly experienced since I've been born. She died when she was just 50 years old from colon cancer, a completely treatable, curable cancer that was caught too late. And in Ukraine, which back then was basically a developing nation, they did not have the ability to save her. And she died a really miserable, painful death. It traumatized my mom, who was not even in her 30s at the time. Since then, my mom has always said that grandma will appear in a weird way, and sometimes she gets weird dreams and whatever. I have always felt like my grandma was around. She has played a huge role on me. She's the reason that I became a child performer in Ukraine because she put me into music and acting and voice acting and all of these things. And anything that I've ever owned from her, I have held on. I think she got me a comb when I was 3 years old. I still have that comb. And if I lose anything from her, I will be devastated. I hover over any item she gave me. So he brings up my maternal grandmother, which 1 in 4 chance, right? I have 4 grandparents. He could have gotten lucky. He guessed right, basically. And he said, I see a really weird thing for you. I see that anything that has ever happened in your life is because of your maternal grandmother. Is she still alive? And I was like, no. And he's like, has she been gone for a while? And I said, yeah, for 20 years. He's like, this is so strange. I see her really strongly in your life. And when you go to bed tonight, thank God for all the things you have in your life. But more specifically, thank your grandmother, because whoever this lady is, she refuses to leave like your aura, basically. And I was shocked. that freaked me out because I don't know how he was able to pick up on that. But ever since I was a little girl, I always knew my grandma was around. I do feel very much that if I need comfort, I can think about my grandma, and she helps guide me along and helps me with my success. So the fact that he also called it out, but so specifically, really, really touched me. I completely agree with you. And that's another reason why I loved reading your book, because I think it was such a unique, fantastic angle to add.
And there are quite a few psychic stories in my book because I love a psychic myself. And it's funny that you said that it's really discouraged in Judaism, because I had two modern Orthodox rabbis sign off on my book and none of them mentioned it. Maybe they were just quietly thinking that. But as it turned out, I guess I've always thought of those things. I know that Judaism does believe in the afterlife. I just don't know what words they would use to describe it. At shul, or there are certain places where you can say an extra prayer in a mikveh, under a chuppah, that you feel like your prayers are heard. And I have a feeling it has to do with, and now I'm going to speak out of turn, that it's got to do with people who've passed, but maybe I'm not the authority on that. But for me, that was such a significant part of my life. And again, added to those stories that you couldn't quite find an easy explanation for. One of the most striking of those stories was when I went to Thailand on a holiday in my 20s, and I had an accident, and I was really so angry at the world for having this accident. I was really in that kind of, why me? Why do bad things have to happen to me? And my mother had flown in immediately to try and help me and see what was going on. When we went for a sleep, just after she came in, when she woke up, she went to the window and said, I didn't know that the accident happened right here. And I said, yeah, it did, right outside. As it turned out, it happened on the road right outside a hospital. So I was taken to the hospital. And she said, I just had a dream that you were meant to die in that accident. My parents, your grandparents, were here and saved you. And if you look at my accident, it really was one where it's hard to know why I didn't die. The right part of my leg got hit. It was incredible that no vital organs, my head, nothing else was injured, because it was an accident that had me in hospital for 3 months, and 2 months after that as an outpatient with 12 operations on my leg. That story connects to a psychic story I had where I visited a psychic on the eve of my accident, and she predicted something and later contacted me, which I write about in the book, to tell me what she had seen. So it's hard to know how all those things add up, all those coincidences. I guess you can never prove anything, right? So you're either a person who believes or not. And I guess my own feeling is that if it helps you, if you feel that it helps you to have a person who's passed guiding you, helping you, informing you, then that can only be a good thing.
That reminds me of a horrible psychic story that my friend told me.
Oh, gosh.
So I have a friend who loves to do like spontaneous things. She tried to get me to pierce my ear randomly at some tattoo shop in West Village. I declined. She's like, you won't get a tattoo. Can we just go pierce your ear? I was like, no. And so I asked her, I was like, why don't we go to a psychic? You want to do something spontaneous. I'm not piercing my ear. Why don't we go to a psychic? And she's like, oh, I'm never going to a psychic. And I was like, why? And she said that she had a friend who went with a group to a psychic, and the psychic said whatever she predicted to each person. And then the last person, let's call him Bill, sat down and she said, oh my gosh, I don't see anything. I can't do a reading for you. Like, here's your money back for you, Bill. I just don't see anything. I'm sorry, I can't do a reading. That same night, they were walking down the street. Bill was ahead of the group, got hit by a bus and died. And that's why the psychic didn't see anything. So yeah, sometimes you wonder, like, is it better to see, or is ignorance really bliss in some of those things?
Yeah.
But your mom definitely had an interesting ability. It's really a touching part of the book. And I want to go back to something you talked about earlier, which is October 7th and the timing of when your book was released based on what was happening in the world. Having written this book and now experienced for over a year what is happening to the Jewish community, especially in places like Australia that also have a significant amount of anti-Semitism, Do you see any parallels between what Mira went through and what we are going through now today?
It's so strange. In the last pages of my book, I write something like, I don't know if I'll ever see the same sort of cruelty in my lifetime that my mother experienced, but I know it's possible because it's always possible. And of course, then a few weeks later, we saw, if not the same level of people being killed, we did see the same motivation and cruelty and willingness to wipe Jewish people off the map as the Nazis held. When I go back and look at the book now, I see so many parallels. The Holocaust started out not with Nazis throwing people into pits. It started out with stereotypes of Jewish people being perpetuated and then groups being made into another, like they were Jews, they did such and such, they lent money, they were greedy, all those tropes of that time. And now we have just different tropes. You're a Jew, you're a Zionist, you believe in apartheid and genocide somehow. All these stereotypes that are based on falsehoods being perpetuated, labels being given that allow people to distance themselves from Jewish people and see them as a group that they don't want to be a part of. And from there, as in the Holocaust, it quickly escalated into first people putting it into those groups at school. My mother wasn't allowed to attend a Jewish school, but it soon escalated into the violence of Kristallnacht and beyond. And here, in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia, we have fairly routinely stickers being put on stores that are Jewish owned. We've had glasses smashed. We've had graffiti. I spoke to a guy yesterday who was at he has a wine bar in this really hip kind of part of town. And he gets people drawing inverted Hamas triangles on his windows, calling out things to him. His only connection with Israel is that he has a Jewish-sounding name, because that is all people are hanging that to, and yet he's been the subject of vilification. It is unbelievable how quickly people have made that leap to, I don't like what the Israeli government is doing, to, I don't like Jews. And you see it everywhere. I don't think that when Jewish patrons are being accosted at a kosher restaurant, that has anything to do with Middle Eastern politics. And I had a version of that experience. I've had 2 protesters so far at different events I've had. But at one, I was the moderator. So I was interviewing somebody else about her book. And my book, of course, is about the Holocaust. Her book was nothing about any of those things. And yet I had a protester jump up on stage and starting to talk about Gaza for a few minutes before he got ushered off. And it struck me a few seconds into that, oh, he's here because of me. He's here because of all the list of presenters he saw today and of books being spoken about. I was the one that had a Star of David on my cover, which is how my cover in Australia looks, and has a Jewish theme. And so that must have meant that I was the one where it was appropriate to get up and speak. What I do think, though, is different from the days of the Holocaust, apart from the scale, is that now you do see leaders and people and allies being willing to speak up and speak out and saying this is wrong. And I still believe that very vocal group who are extreme in their responses are the very loud minority, at least in Australia. They're not the majority of people. I think Australia is still the country my parents sought to come to seek sanctuary after World War II and found it. I personally have had an outpouring from readers, so many non-Jewish, saying how much they loved my book and how much they loved hearing about Judaism and all the beauty of the religion, and how they despaired over everything that was happening and all the anti-Semitism they could see. So I think that is different. I think there are leaders who are different. I've met with politicians, many politicians who have spoken about their support for the Jewish community. And so that is markedly different from the Holocaust.
It's so interesting because you have such an optimistic view, whereas my view on the differences is so cynical compared to yours. When I think about the differences here, how I view the Germans is, at the end of the day, they tried to hide what they were doing. because it felt like they knew it was wrong. They felt like they were doing a necessary evil, so they wanted to hide the evidence. Hamas and Islamist terrorists, they don't even try to hide. In fact, they do the opposite. They videotape and they glorify, which shows that it's an even further greater evil than what the Nazis were ever able to achieve, because they want to document and memorialize these crimes as opposed to feel shame and the desire to hide them, which I think is a big difference. The other big difference I think makes me a little bit cynical is we have the state of Israel. More people are not anti-Semitic because we now can defend ourselves, which we weren't able to before. We have the Israeli Defense Forces that protects us, and we have a strong people, like Israelis. They're incredibly resilient and strong and brave, and they're willing to defend not only their country, but when they serve and when they speak up in Israel, they're defending all of the Jewish people in the diaspora. And that's a thing we didn't have before. And that's what keeps the checks and balances in place, I think, in the larger society. But that's a very cynical view from my side.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree that it's a greater evil. I just think it's a differently motivated evil. In terms of Israel, it's true that Israel makes all of us safer, but it also has nothing to do with the citizens, the Australian citizens, the American citizens, the Canadian citizens, those people in Europe and around the world who are willing to stand up and say, this is wrong. This is my Jewish neighbour and I am proud of them. I respect them. I want them to flourish. And I think there are still plenty of those, although, if you're on a place like Instagram or TikTok, it just might not feel like that. But if you're a person like me and you've written a book about the Holocaust and Judaism, maybe you would be less cynical and more optimistic, because I do hear from people all the time who write me the most glorious things, who open their hearts and minds and want to learn more. I had a teacher from regional Victoria, Melbourne to Victoria, who came with me to a synagogue service for Shavuot. He has some Judaism in his ancestry, but he just wanted to learn more and find out more. And he's been writing papers on Jewish education and Holocaust education in non-Jewish schools. And I just find that incredible, that generosity that people have, where they want to make you their neighbor and their friend and not their enemy.
I like your points. And I think the truth of it is in the middle, and going back to what you said, you see what you look for. So I think because you look for these beautiful moments where the people you know who are not Jewish stand up for their Jewish counterparts, you see them more often. So maybe I should start looking for those opportunities myself.
And I think as Jewish people, we've always combated many difficulties through Jewish pride and through education, and we're great communicators. So I just keep doing my thing. I keep standing up and standing tall and proud. I'm wearing something today that is from one of the kibbutzim in Israel, raising money. I wear Magen David. I put on my Instagram my Judaism with pride, and I let people have conversations with me. I'm not trying to have a screaming match with somebody whose politics are different to my own. And politics can polarize many people. You can see what's happening in America with the elections and the election result. You really have to look, I think, for connection above division and try and find love rather than hate, which sounds so simplistic, but if you keep turning your head that way, I think eventually it has an impact.
Beautifully said. And I want to switch gears to talk to you about your contribution to On Being Jewish Now. So I had Zibby Owens and another contributor to the book, Bradley Tusk, and we talked about how they thought about the book and the impact it had on them. Talk to me about the essay that you contributed and the message that you wanted to send.
That was an incredible project to be a part of. And so many things in my life, serendipity and whatever you want to call it, coincidence plays a very big part. I was introduced to Zibby through a mutual friend who loved my book, and Zibby ended up reading it and loving it too. Here is this woman who has just done so much for this cause, for combating anti-Semitism, not only being one of the co-founders for the Artists Against Anti-Semitism, to which the book, all the proceeds of the book goes, but to keep highlighting Jewish authors and speaking out all the time about it. The collection of essays is really interesting because we were all asked to write about how we feel being Jewish post-October the 7th. And for many people, that was really different things. There are a lot of people who have lived a very secular life who write about their feeling of Jewishness and how they express it. There are others who observe their life in a more religious way. And it's such a hodgepodge and gorgeous mix of essays that are both moving, sometimes funny. They're a fantastic collection. With me, I wrote about, not the protester I spoke to you about, but an earlier protester I had who was barely a protester in that I was speaking at an outdoor writers' festival and I was only told about her appearance afterwards. She had a Free Palestine sign by her side and she was wearing a keffiyeh and she was starting to get ready to raise it when, from the stage, I started speaking about all the things my mother Mira stood for, all the ways she saw the world, all the light that she brought within it, and that human connection that she prized most of all. And as I said that, this woman put down her sign, and I realized the power in my mother's words and her way of being when I heard about this protester later. To me, writing about my mother too, and I wrote about this in the essay, there was such a pull to my ancestors and learning who I am as being Jewish and what there is an obligation for me to continue. I realized why I like going to synagogue and how it relates to this ancestral pull. And it's because when I go, ostensibly I go because I like the music, I like hearing the prayers, I like hearing the rabbi's sermon, I feel comforted. But why do I feel all these things? Why do I feel that sense of peace and comfort? And somewhere along the way, I realized that it was because I never met any of my 4 grandparents. All 4 of them were murdered in the Holocaust. When I go to my synagogue here in Melbourne, which looks sort of old-fashioned, it's got wooden paneling, it's got its Aron HaKodesh at the front with words across the curtain, knowest before who thy stands. We say prayers in a very similar way that my grandparents would have heard when they went to synagogue. I'm replicating an experience with them that they would have had, that I couldn't have in real life, but it's the one thing I share with them. Yeah, they grew up in homes where there was no electricity and no running water, and when you look at our lives on the surface, it would have been very different. I live a very futuristic life compared to what they experienced before they died. But where we join forces is in a synagogue, where the prayers are the same, the tunes are the same, the feeling of it is the same, the motivation for going there is the same. And now I feel very differently about my Judaism when I walk into a shul and I realize not just where I've come from, but where I need to be. That obligation to continue Judaism because of all that our ancestors went through, because of all the persecutions that we have endured for thousands of years. And what stays the same? Our faith in who we are, our commitment to keep it going, our obligation to pass it on to future generations and inspire them. And that's a tiny bit of what I wrote about in the essay and what I really hope to do, both in my book and in life.
Amazing. And how can people connect with you on social media and learn more about your upcoming work and projects?
I am so ridiculously easy to find. It's not even funny. First of all, I see direct messages on Instagram. So I'm on Rachelle UNR, and I have a website, RachelleUnreich.com. So if you Google Rachelle, A Brilliant Life, all those things should bring you to me. Even Facebook, sometimes I miss those messages because they go in a different folder, but I try to get to those too. So I love hearing from people. I love it when people reach out, and I learn things all the time. I mean, it is crazy. I've heard from readers in Switzerland, Germany, Israel, England, America, Canada. Someone posted a photo of my book. They were reading it in Mexico, another one in Thailand. The idea not just that my book is being read, but that my mother's story, that Mira Unreich, is being heard in all these different places. It makes me feel so proud that I didn't let her story just die with her death, that I'm continuing it in some way and that people all over the world are being inspired by her.
The way you share Mira's story, it's very clear that she has always had like a little bit of a celebrity factor to her. So this only fits, I would say. This tracks.
She did, and the best story for that is, so I always joke because I reckon she had the most famous Shabbat dinners in Australia, in that she has had a few famous people at her table. I won't go into how, but Ben Mendelsohn being one, the actor, the Australian actor, and Rachel Griffiths being another Australian actor. And Rachel actually does the audio book for my book. And the reason she does it is because my mother was a landlady, and Rachel lived in one of her apartments for 14 years with her husband and ended up having her children there too. So she came for Friday night dinners occasionally, and my mother would let her kids play at her house and not look after them, but she'd feed them sweets because they weren't allowed to have sugar, and she'd let them watch TV because they weren't allowed to have screens. Yeah, she was a part of their lives. When my mother was first diagnosed with cancer, I bumped into Rachel at an event that I was at as being a journalist, and I know Rachel well, just afterwards. And I told her what was happening, and she was very sorry to hear it. And the next day, I'm driving along, and I get a phone call from Mira. And Mira goes, "You'll never guess who is sitting with me here right now. Say hi to Rachel." And Rachel had heard that my mother had cancer and had driven there the next day to say hi and see how she was doing. And they had a really good connection, so that when it came time to do the audiobook, I bumped into Rachel again, begged her to do it, and she instantly said yes, because she felt such a connection with Mira, on the condition that I be there while she was recording. And it was amazing to sit with her in this little recording studio and hear her connection through her words and her tone and her inflection. You can hear when she's encountering difficult parts of the story because her voice cracks. And there were several times we had to stop and let her gather herself because she was so emotionally affected by what she was reading. And there was one funny time where Mira in the book is saying, "I don't know why people wanted to help me all the time. People always help me, and I don't know what it was about me, but they were always this way. I don't know why." And Rachel stopped recording and she said, "I know why. She has this power. That's what she does." Rachel said, "I don't want to be here either in a recording studio for 12 hours, but I had to. It was Mira." So she had this very quiet influence on people. She wasn't a pushy person. She wasn't a loud person, but she was a strong person, and you felt her power and her energy when you walked in a room with her. My favorite story of that is that after she died, we got this note in her house that had been slipped under her door, a handwritten note from a neighbor. And the note went on to say, "I didn't know your mother. I knew who she was in the street. I knew that she'd been a Holocaust survivor. But apart from nodding my head and greeting her when we passed each other, we didn't have more to do with each other." And she said, "But I don't know what it was. I always felt this certain kind of magic, a certain energy emanating from her home. And I had to tell you about it." I thought, oh my God, this person hasn't even spoken to Mira and she feels her power and energy. So that made me laugh too.
Mira is a people you want to know, that is for sure.
Mira is a people you want to know. Absolutely, Margarita.
And I have one final question for you. It's one that I ask every single guest. Who would you like to nominate for People You Want to Know podcast?
I am going to say my friend, so it makes me feel obligated, Elan Gold, who is a fantastic comedian. I met him many years ago when I lived in New York, and I watched him doing stand-up, and somehow that led to me forming a friendship with him and his wife, Sasha. I went to a New Year's Eve party they had, and we've kept in touch all these years. And when I went to Los Angeles last, my kids got to meet his family. He's not only a tremendously funny person, but he is a strong Jew who not only observes Judaism very well, but really speaks out about important issues and uses his platform for good, all the while throwing a joke in as well. I just think he's a terrific person, and everyone would do well to follow him at the very least.
Thank you for this fantastic nomination. It has been an absolute delight and a privilege to speak with you today.
Margaret, I feel so happy that you took the time to learn about the book, to read it, and then to find me. I love your podcast, and I'm really excited for everyone to listen and hopefully feel a bit of Mira magic around them.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People You Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People You Want to Know.